October 10th, 1944. 5 o'clock in the morning. The kitchen at Camp Algona smelled of coffee and possibility. Isaiah Beaumont Crow had been awake since 4, his hands already flour-dusted, his mind already working through the mathematics of feeding 10,000 men. The industrial ovens hummed their familiar song. Steam rose from massive stockpots. Outside the kitchen windows, the Iowa sky was still black as coal, stars fading one by one into the approaching dawn. Isaiah was 45 years old. His hands told the story. Scars from hot pans, burns from grease splatter, calluses from decades of chopping, kneading, stirring. These were the hands of a man who'd been cooking since he was tall enough to reach the stove. These were the hands of a man who understood that cooking was more than sustenance. It was memory. It was survival. It was love made solid. He reached for the cornmeal. The bag was heavy, 50 pounds of golden grain ground fine as sand. Isaiah poured it into the mixing bowl with the reverence of a priest handling holy water. This was no ordinary ingredient. This was his grandmother's voice. This was history. Ruth Crow had died 24 years ago, but Isaiah could still see her hands, dark and weathered, strong despite the arthritis that twisted her fingers. She had been born enslaved in Alabama in 1840, had lived to see freedom, had raised 8 children on cornmeal and hope. "Isaiah, baby," she used to say, her voice soft as worn cotton. "This here is survival bread. When they gave us nothing, we ground the field corn ourselves, made it into something that could keep a family alive. Don't you ever forget where it comes from." He never had. Isaiah measured buttermilk, cracked eggs, added a pinch of salt. His movements were automatic now, muscle memory from 10,000 batches of cornbread. But each one still mattered. Each one was still his grandmother's recipe. Each one was still sacred. The batter went into cast iron pans, into the oven. The heat transformed it, golden, fragrant, perfect. While the cornbread baked, Isaiah checked the photograph he kept in his shirt pocket. His son, Caleb Nathaniel Crow, 20 years old, Navy uniform crisp and new, bright smile that could light up a room. Somewhere in the Pacific right now, somewhere dangerous. Isaiah had written him last week. Nothing profound, just everyday details, the weather turning cold, the German prisoners arriving, the routine of camp life. But between every line was what he couldn't say. Come home safe, please God, let him come home safe. The timer rang. Isaiah pulled the cornbread from the oven, perfect golden squares, the surface glistening where butter had melted into every crack and crevice. The smell filled the kitchen, comfort and history and love all mixed together. He set the pans aside to cool. Outside, the camp was waking up, boots on gravel, voices calling morning roll, the clang of gates opening, another day beginning. But today would be different. Today, the women were arriving. 10 o'clock in the morning. Margaret Louise Evans stood at her office window, watching the train approach. The locomotive's whistle cut through the autumn air, mournful, inevitable, like so many things in this war. Her fingers found the gold star pinned to her lapel. She touched it without thinking now. A habit formed over 4 months of grief. Lieutenant Thomas Robert Evans, her son, 23 years old, killed on Normandy Beach in June. The telegram had been brief. Regret to inform, killed in action, died serving his country. The words meant nothing. They were just shapes on paper. They couldn't capture Thomas, his laugh, his terrible jokes, the way he used to steal cookies from her kitchen when he thought she wasn't looking. The train was closer now. Margaret squared her shoulders, smoothed her jacket, put on the face she wore for official duties. Camp administrator, military precision, no emotion showing. But underneath, Always, the gold star burned against her chest like a brand. The train doors opened. A woman stepped out first, late 20s, dark blonde hair pinned severely beneath a faded military cap. Grey auxiliary uniform pressed as straight as circumstances allowed. She moved with quiet authority, the bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. Helen Ingrid Weber. Margaret had memorized the file, 28 years old, former schoolteacher from Hamburg, educated, spoke English well, no known Nazi affiliations beyond mandatory party membership. Behind Helen came the others. 11 more women, ages ranging from 19 to mid-30s, faces pale from weeks of travel, eyes uncertain, hands clutching small bundles of permitted possessions. They looked terrified. Margaret watched as American guards formed up on the platform. Sergeant Frank Morrison Blake led the detail. 40 years old, Tennessee accent thick as molasses. He'd fought in North Africa before being transferred stateside for administrative duty. A good man, fair, decent. "Ladies," Sergeant Blake said, his voice carrying the weight of command, softened by unexpected courtesy. "Welcome to Camp Algona. You'll be processed according to Geneva Convention standards. No rough treatment, no harassment. Follow instructions and we'll get along fine." Helen stepped forward. Her English was careful but clear. "We understand, Sergeant. We will comply." The accent was precise, educated, the voice of someone who had once taught children grammar and mathematics in a world that felt impossibly distant now. Margaret watched the processing begin. Forms in triplicate, medical examinations, photographs for identification cards. The women maintained their dignity throughout. No weeping, no protests. Just quiet resignation mixed with cautious relief. By noon, they were assigned to their quarters. Clean barracks, proper cots, blankets, basic amenities, everything by the book, everything according to international law. America would show the world that even in war, civilization could prevail. Even if Margaret's son was dead in French soil, even if her heart felt like it had been torn from her chest and buried with him. The mess hall at noon. Long wooden tables stretched across the room, tin plates and cups, the smell of vegetable soup, institutional but nourishing. The 12 German women filed in, their movements uncertain, eyes taking in everything, calculating, assessing. Isaiah watched from the kitchen doorway. He had prepared something special, the soup, yes, standard camp fare, but also cornbread, his grandmother's recipe, golden squares still warm from the oven, butter glistening on their surfaces. It was a gesture, a small kindness, a taste of American hospitality. He placed the cornbread beside the soup bowls, 1 square per woman. Perfect portions. Helen Weber was first in line. She looked down at her plate, soup in the bowl, the mysterious yellow square beside it. She picked it up, examined it with the careful attention of a scientist studying an unknown specimen. Her brow furrowed. She broke the cornbread apart, watched the crumbly texture fall onto her plate, held a piece up to the light. "Das ist kein Brot." The words exploded across the mess hall, sharp, incredulous, shocked. "It's not even bread." The other women looked up, looked at their plates, picked up the cornbread, examined it with the same confusion. And then they laughed, not cruel laughter, not mocking, just genuine bewilderment, amusement at this strange yellow thing Americans called bread. This crumbly, grainy substance that bore no resemblance to the dark rye loaves they knew from home. Helen repeated it in English, holding up her piece. "It's not even bread." The laughter spread. 11 other women joining in, their first moment of genuine mirth since captivity began. Isaiah stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. The smile died on his face. The warmth drained from his eyes. His hands, still holding the empty cornbread pan, began to tremble. American guards standing nearby looked at the German women with sudden coldness, looked at Isaiah with sympathy. The tension in the room shifted. What had started as respectful treatment suddenly felt like insult. Isaiah set down the pan, turned, walked back into the kitchen. Behind him, the laughter continued. They had no idea what they had just done, no idea what they had just mocked, no idea that they had laughed at survival itself. The afternoon passed in silence. Isaiah worked mechanically, chopping vegetables for dinner, stirring soup, following recipes he could perform in his sleep. But the warmth was gone, the care, the love that usually seasoned every dish. He was just going through motions now. The guards noticed. They whispered among themselves, looked at the German women with harder eyes. The tentative courtesy that had marked the morning gave way to cold military protocol. Corporal Levi Armstrong, a 22-year-old farm boy from Nebraska, approached Isaiah in the late afternoon. "That was wrong what they did," Levi said quietly. "Your cornbread is the best thing in this camp. They don't know what they're talking about." Isaiah didn't look up from the onions he was dicing. "They're from a different place, but," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "Different food, they don't understand." "Still," Levi insisted. "It was disrespectful." Isaiah just nodded, kept chopping. In her quarters, Helen sat on her cot, feeling increasingly uneasy. The laughter had felt harmless in the moment, just confusion about unfamiliar food. But something about the atmosphere in the camp had changed. The guards were more distant now, eyes harder, voices colder. Anna Rosemary Fisher, the youngest at 19, sat beside Helen. "Did we do something wrong?" Anna asked. Her voice was small, uncertain. Helen didn't know how to answer. Evening came. Margaret Evans found Isaiah in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's breakfast. He stood at the prep table, hands moving through familiar tasks, but his face was carved from stone. "Isaiah," Margaret said gently. He looked up, nodded. "Mom." "The cornbread," she began. "I wonder if you might help me understand something." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "It's nothing, Mom. They're used to different bread. European bread, dark rye, heavy loaves. Cornbread probably seems strange to them. But it's more than that, isn't it?" Silence. Margaret pulled up a stool, sat down. She had lost her son. She understood grief, understood pain that ran deeper than words. "Tell me," she said quietly, "where does cornbread come from? For you, I mean. What's its story?" Isaiah set down his knife, leaned against the prep table, his eyes focused on something beyond the kitchen walls, beyond the camp, beyond Iowa, all the way back to Alabama, all the way back to his grandmother's hands. "My grandmother," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "was born enslaved. 1840, Alabama plantation. She used to tell me about it when I was small, how they were given corn, field corn, the cheap stuff, had to grind it themselves by hand, made it into meal." He picked up the bag of cornmeal, let the golden granules run through his fingers like sand. She said cornbread was survival bread when there was nothing else, when they had no wheat, no money, nothing. They had corn. She raised 8 children on cornmeal and hope, said every batch was a prayer, every crumb was a day her family lived. Margaret listened, silent, understanding beginning to dawn. "And later," Isaiah continued, "during the Depression, when the banks failed, when there were no jobs, my family lived on cornbread. We couldn't afford wheat flour, couldn't afford much of anything, but we had cornmeal, 50-pound bags that lasted months. My mother made it stretch, fed 5 of us on almost nothing." He looked at Margaret directly now. His eyes were wet. "So when those women laughed," he said, his voice cracking, "they weren't just laughing at food. They were laughing at my grandmother's survival, at my family's survival, at every person who ever made do with what they had because they had no choice." Margaret felt tears on her own cheeks. She understood now, understood the depth of the wound. They didn't know, she said softly. They couldn't have known. No, Isaiah agreed. They couldn't, but it still hurts. That evening, Anna Fisher brought something to Helen's quarters, a newspaper, the Des Moines Register. Margaret had approved it for English lessons. Look, Anna said, pointing to an article, about corn. Helen took the paper, read the headline. Corn, America's survival grain. The article detailed corn's role in American history, how it had sustained Native Americans for millennia, how it had kept early colonists alive through brutal winters, how enslaved people had survived on it when given nothing else, how it had fed the nation through the Great Depression. Helen read slowly, each paragraph adding weight to her understanding. Field corn, cornmeal, cornbread. Not a joke, not a strange foreign food. A lifeline. She thought of her mother, dead 5 years now, but her voice still clear in Helen's memory. Gratitude is the first courtesy, Helen. When someone offers you bread, even if it tastes of sawdust, you thank them. You thank them because they shared what they had. Helen set down the newspaper, looked at Anna. We made a terrible mistake, she said quietly. Anna nodded. What do we do? Helen didn't know. The hurt had been done. The laughter had echoed, the insult had landed. How do you apologize for mocking someone's history? For laughing at survival itself? Outside, the Iowa wind picked up. October wind carrying the scent of dying corn stalks. Winter was coming, the world was at war. And in this small camp in the middle of America, a wound had opened. A wound that would take more than words to heal. Helen lay on her cot that night, unable to sleep. She thought about the cook's face when they had laughed, the way the light had died in his eyes, the way he had turned away without a word. She thought about her mother's lessons, about courtesy, about gratitude, about recognizing kindness even when it came in unfamiliar forms. She thought about the article, about survival, about people making do with what they had. And she felt shame settle over her like a heavy blanket. Outside in his small quarters behind the kitchen, Isaiah Beaumont Crow sat in darkness. The photograph of Caleb was on the table beside him, his son, somewhere in the Pacific. His grandmother, 24 years dead, but still present in every batch of cornbread he made. Tomorrow, there would be no cornbread on the menu, just white bread from the commissary, bland, tasteless, safe. His grandmother's recipe would stay locked in the drawer. Some things, once laughed at, could not be easily shared again. The wound was too deep, the distance too far. But neither Isaiah nor Helen knew in that cold October night that the distance between them would soon collapse under the weight of shared grief. That survival, in the end, spoke a language everyone understood, that bread eventually would become the bridge, not yet, but soon. November came to Iowa like a whisper of winter. The cornfields around Camp Algona turned brown, skeletal. The wind carried a sharper edge now. Frost appeared on windows each morning. The world was preparing for cold. Inside the camp, something else was changing. Small things, barely noticeable at first. Margaret Evans had organized what she called cultural exchange activities. Poker night on Tuesdays, English lessons on Thursdays. Simple attempts to bridge the distance that had opened in that first terrible lunch. Helen Weber threw herself into teaching. It gave her purpose. Direction. A way to atone for the laughter that still echoed in her memory. She stood before a small group of American guards, a chalkboard behind her, teaching basic German phrases. Guten Tag, she said slowly. Good day. Corporal Levi Armstrong repeated it, his Nebraska accent making the German sound strangely musical. Guten Tag. The German women laughed, but this time the laughter was warm, encouraging. Close enough, Helen said, smiling. In return, the women practiced English. Helen corrected their pronunciation with the patience of a born teacher. The sound, she explained. Put your tongue between your teeth. Thank you, not tank you. Anna Fisher struggled with it. Sank you, tank you. Better, Helen encouraged, but Isaiah remained distant. He appeared in the mess hall at mealtimes, set out regulation portions, white bread from the commissary, soup, stew, nothing special, nothing with soul. The guards noticed. The food was technically adequate, nutritionally sound. But it lacked something essential. The care was gone. The warmth, the invisible ingredient that made food taste like home. Isaiah had withdrawn into himself. He performed his duties with mechanical precision, then disappeared back into his kitchen, a fortress of wounded pride. Helen wanted to approach him, to apologize, to explain. But the words caught in her throat every time she saw him. How do you apologize for laughing at someone's history? The distance remained. Until Anna got sick. November 8th, morning roll call. The women stood in neat rows outside their barracks, breath visible in the cold air, counting off in German-accented English. Anna was third from the end, 19 years old, the youngest, the one who tried hardest to make friends with the guards. She swayed. Helen noticed first, reached out. Anna? Anna's face was pale. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. I don't feel... she began, and then she collapsed. The gravel was hard beneath her. Helen dropped to her knees beside the girl. Anna's skin was burning, fever radiating from her like a furnace. Medic! Helen shouted in English. Schnell, quickly! Sergeant Blake was there in seconds. He lifted Anna effortlessly. The girl was tiny in his arms, light as kindling. The camp doctor met them at the infirmary. Dr. Patterson, 60 years old, stern but professional. He took one look at Anna and his face went serious. Thermometer, stethoscope, careful examination. Influenza, he said finally. The word fell like a stone. High fever, 104 degrees. She needs rest, fluids, careful monitoring. He looked at Helen, at Sergeant Blake. The fever needs to break within 24 hours, or we're looking at complications. Helen sat beside Anna's cot, held the girl's hand. Anna was barely conscious, mumbling in German, calling for her mother. Mutti, she whispered. Mutti, ich habe Angst. Mother, I'm scared. Helen stroked her hair. Shh, du bist nicht allein, you're not alone. But the fever burned on. Isaiah heard about Anna's collapse at lunch. Corporal Armstrong mentioned it while collecting food for the guards. That young German girl, Anna, she's real sick. Doc says it's touch and go. Isaiah's hands paused over the soup ladle. Anna, the youngest one, the one who always smiled at him despite the awkwardness, the one who had tried to say thank you in English after every meal, even when he served nothing but plain bread. He finished serving, then stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing. His grandmother's voice came to him, clear as if she were standing beside him. When a child is sick, Isaiah, you do what you can. Doesn't matter whose child. Doesn't matter what side they're on. A sick child is just a child. Isaiah moved without thinking. He gathered ingredients, cornmeal, buttermilk, honey, a small saucepan of milk warming on the stove. His hands knew what to do. They'd made this recipe 100 times. For his own children when they had fevers, for neighbors' kids, for anyone who needed comfort in the form of food. Cornbread soaked in warm milk, sweetened with honey, his grandmother's cure for everything that ailed a child. He prepared it carefully, cut the cornbread into small pieces, soaked them until they were soft, added honey until it was sweet enough to tempt even a fevered appetite, poured it into a bowl, then he carried it to the infirmary. Helen looked up when the door opened. Isaiah Beaumont Crow stood there, holding a bowl, his face uncertain. "I heard the girl was sick," he said quietly. Helen stood. "Yes, Anna. The fever won't break." Isaiah approached the cot, looked down at Anna. Her face was flushed, hair damp with sweat. She looked so young, so vulnerable. "My grandmother," Isaiah said softly, "used to make this when children had fevers, said it could cure anything." He sat in the chair beside Anna's cot, stirred the bowl gently. The smell of honey and cornbread filled the small space. "Anna," he said. His voice was gentle, the voice of a father. "Can you try to eat something?" Anna's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, fevered. "Bitter," she whispered. "Please." Isaiah spooned a small portion, held it carefully. "Just a little bite. It'll help." Anna opened her mouth. Trustingly, the way sick children do when they recognize care in a voice. The warm mixture slid down her throat, sweet with honey, soft as a lullaby. For a moment, nothing. Then Anna's eyes brightened. Something beyond the fever. Recognition of comfort, of kindness. "Danke," she whispered. "Thank you." She swallowed another spoonful, and another. Isaiah fed her patiently, slowly, the way he had fed his own daughter Sarah through childhood illnesses, the way his grandmother had fed him when he was small and sick. Anna's eyes found his face, really looked at him for the first time. "Schmeckt wie Hoffnung," she said. Her voice was weak but certain. Helen translated quietly from the doorway. "It tastes like hope." Isaiah's eyes went wet. He nodded, kept feeding her. "That's what my grandmother said, that cornbread was hope made solid." Anna ate half the bowl before exhaustion claimed her. She fell back against the pillow, but something had changed. The fever seemed less intense, her breathing easier. Isaiah stood, set the bowl aside, looked at Helen for the first time since that terrible lunch. "I'll bring more tomorrow," he said simply. "Thank you," Helen said. The words were inadequate, insufficient for what had just happened. But Isaiah just nodded and left. Helen sat back down beside Anna, held the girl's hand, and for the first time since arriving at Camp Algona, she wept. Not from fear, not from homesickness, from understanding. She had seen a man care for a stranger's child, had seen him cross every divide of language and nationality and hurt, had seen him offer comfort in the form of his grandmother's recipe, had seen humanity in its purest form. The cornbread they had mocked was not just food, it was medicine, it was love, it was survival and hope and care all mixed together. It was everything. By the next morning, Anna's fever had broken. Dr. Patterson examined her with professional surprise. "I'll be damned, whatever you gave her, it worked." Anna sat up, weak but smiling. "The cook, Mr. Crow, his grandmother's recipe." The doctor nodded, made a note in his chart. "Well, Grandmother Crow knew her medicine." Isaiah brought cornbread, soaked in milk twice more that day. Anna ate gratefully, her strength returning with each bowl. By November 10th, she was well enough to return to her quarters. She found Isaiah in the kitchen that afternoon, stood in the doorway, uncertain. Mr. Crow? He looked up from the vegetables he was chopping. I want to thank you, Anna said carefully. Her English was improving daily. You saved my life. You didn't have to. We were your enemy. But you helped me anyway. Isaiah set down his knife, studied this young woman, 19 years old, far from home, scared, trying to survive in a world that made no sense. You were never my enemy, he said quietly. You're just a girl who got sick, a child far from her mother. Anyone would have helped. Not anyone, Anna said. You. She stepped forward, extended her hand. Isaiah looked at it, then took it, shook it firmly. You're welcome, Anna. The wall between them crumbled. Just like that, November 21st. The announcement came during evening roll call. Margaret Evans stood before the assembled prisoners, a Red Cross representative beside her. Each prisoner will be permitted to write one letter per month to immediate family members. Letters will be reviewed for security purposes, but personal messages will be transmitted through proper international channels. The women's faces transformed. Joy, relief, hope, weeks of silence, weeks of not knowing, of imagining the worst. Now, connection, however fragile, however monitored. Now, a lifeline home. Helen spent 3 days composing her letter to Katrine, her younger sister, 25 years old. Still in Hamburg as far as Helen knew. Liebe Katrin, I am safe and well treated in a place called Iowa. The land here stretches to the horizon like the sea we knew as children. The guards follow international law strictly. We are fed regularly. Strange food sometimes, including a yellow bread made from corn, but it is made with care. There is a cook here, an American man whose grandmother survived slavery. I made a terrible mistake when I first arrived. I laughed at his food. I did not understand what it represented. Survival, hope. The same things our mother taught us about bread during the lean years. The cook forgave me by saving young Anna's life with his grandmother's recipe. He showed me that humanity transcends nationality. Kiss the children for me. Tell them their Tante Helen thinks of them every day. Helen sealed the letter, handed it to Margaret Evans, watched it disappear into the military postal system, prayed it would reach Hamburg, prayed Katrin was alive to receive it. Isaiah wrote to Caleb that same week, Son, I hope this letter finds you safe. I hope the Pacific is kind to you. I hope you're getting enough to eat. Something strange happened here. German women prisoners arrived. One of them laughed at my cornbread. It hurt more than I expected, more than I wanted to admit. But then the youngest got sick, and I fed her Grandma Ruth's remedy. Cornbread soaked in milk with honey. Remember when I made that for you and Sarah when you had fevers? The girl survived, and I realized something. Your grandmother's survival became this girl's survival. The recipe traveled from slavery to a prisoner of war camp, from one century to another, from one kind of captivity to another kind of freedom. Maybe that's what survival is, passing on what kept you alive, hoping it keeps someone else alive too. Come home safe, Caleb. Your old man is getting philosophical in his old age. Both letters disappeared into the void, into the chaos of war, into the uncertain machinery of international mail. Both writers hoping, praying, waiting for replies that might never come. November 23rd, Thanksgiving. Margaret had arranged for a special meal. Turkey, stuffing, the works. Isaiah spent 2 days preparing, his pride returning, his care seeping back into his cooking, and he made cornbread stuffing. The women came to the mess hall warily, uncertain, but Anna led them to the kitchen window. Mr. Crow made something special, she announced. The stuffing appeared on plates. golden with bits of cornbread visible throughout. Helen looked at her portion, then at Isaiah, who watched from the kitchen doorway. She picked up a forkful. The cornbread pieces were soft, savory, mixed with herbs and vegetables. She tasted it, closed her eyes. "Was ist das?" one of the other women asked. "What is this?" Anna answered in German, then in English for the guard's benefit. "This is the yellow pieces, cornbread, just mixed different." Helen opened her eyes, looked directly at Isaiah. "It's very good," she said in English, clear, certain. "Thank you for making it," Isaiah nodded, a small smile touching his lips. The other women tasted, nodded, ate with genuine appreciation. The laughter this time was warm, understanding, the sound of people sharing a meal. Sharing Thanksgiving. Corporal Armstrong grinned. "Best stuffing in Iowa, I'd say." "Best in America," Anna declared. The ice was melting, slowly, carefully, but melting. December 10th, morning. Margaret Evans received the telegram at 8 a.m. Her hands trembled as she read it. The words swam before her eyes. Regret to inform. Caleb, Nathaniel Crow, missing in action, naval engagement, later Gulf, search continuing. Missing. Not dead, but missing. She had received this telegram once before, 4 months ago, about her own son. Except Thomas's had said, killed in action. Missing was worse, somehow. Missing meant hope. Hope meant agony. She found Isaiah in the kitchen. He was peeling potatoes for the evening meal, his hands steady, his face calm. "Isaiah," she said. Her voice broke on his name. He looked up, saw her face. Knew. "Caleb?" She handed him the telegram. Isaiah read it. His hands began to shake. The potato peeler clattered to the floor. He gripped the counter, knees buckling. "Missing," he whispered. My boy is missing." Margaret caught him, held him as he collapsed. This strong man, this proud man, broken by 3 words, missing in action. They sat on the kitchen floor. 2 parents, 2 gold stars, 2 children swallowed by war, and wept. 3 hours later, another telegram arrived, this one with international routing stamps. Red Cross letterhead for Helen Weber. Margaret delivered it herself, found Helen teaching English to a small group. "Helen," Margaret said, "I need to speak with you privately." Helen's face went white. She knew. Somehow she knew. The letter was brief. Written by a neighbor in Hamburg. The Red Cross had tracked Helen down, had delivered the news. Hamburg bombed December 9th. Harbor district destroyed. Katrine Weber missing, presumed dead in the rubble. Dead. The children evacuated to relatives. Katrine gone. Helen read it twice. 3 times. The words not making sense. Katrine, who loved music, who played piano, who laughed like bells ringing. Dead. Buried under rubble. 25 years old. Gone. Helen folded the letter, walked back to her quarters, lay down on her cot, and stared at the ceiling. Margaret watched her go, then walked the camp alone. Thinking of Thomas, of Caleb, of Katrine, of all the children swallowed by this war, the gold star on her chest had never felt heavier. December 11th through 17th, the camp fell silent. Isaiah cooked mechanically. Soup, bread, nothing special, nothing with heart, just fuel, just function. Helen stopped teaching, stopped talking, just stared at walls that held no answers. The distance between them was gone now, but not from reconciliation, from grief. Two people drowning in loss, too far inside their own pain to reach for anyone else. Anna brought Helen food, sat with her, said nothing, just present. Corporal Armstrong checked on Isaiah, offered quiet condolences, got only nods in return. The camp moved around them like water around stones. And outside, the Iowa weather turned colder. A blizzard was coming. December 18th, 1944, 6 o'clock in the evening. The wind came from the north like a living thing, hungry, vicious. It screamed across the Iowa plains at 60 miles per hour, driving snow before it like needles of ice. The blizzard hit Camp Algona with biblical fury. Windows rattled in their frames, buildings groaned under the assault. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, then kept falling. At 7 o'clock, the heating system failed. Pipes froze, burst, water sprayed and instantly turned to ice. The boilers coughed, sputtered, died. Within 30 minutes, the barracks were freezing. Sergeant Blake made the decision quickly. Emergency protocol, everyone to the mess hall. The largest building, the best insulated, the only place with working heat from the kitchen stoves. The evacuation happened fast. Guards grabbing blankets, prisoners clutching what little they owned, staff members herding everyone through the howling wind, snow blinding, cold like knives cutting through clothing. The mess hall doors swung open. 200 people poured inside, Germans, Americans, military, civilian, all distinctions erased by the democracy of cold. Sergeant Blake and Corporal Armstrong worked quickly. Metal drums became improvised braziers, wood scraps, anything that would burn. Small fires bloomed across the hall. Circles of warmth in the freezing space. Blankets appeared from supply stores, distributed without thought to nationality. An American guard wrapped a blanket around a shivering German woman. A German prisoner shared her blanket with a young private from Boston. Survival didn't see flags, cold didn't care about sides. Isaiah stood near the kitchen, watching. His grief was a weight on his shoulders. Had been for 7 days. Caleb missing, somewhere in the Pacific, maybe alive, maybe dead. The not knowing was its own kind of death, but he was still the cook, still responsible. He kept the kitchen stoves burning, kept coffee brewing, kept the only reliable source of heat functioning. Helen sat against the far wall, Anna beside her. 7 days since the letter about Katrine, 7 days of numbness, of staring at nothing, of wondering how the world could keep turning when her sister was buried under Hamburg rubble. The German women clustered together for warmth. The guards formed their own groups, small islands of humanity in a freezing sea. The wind howled louder, the building shook. Outside the world was white chaos. Inside fear settled like frost. 10 o'clock. The fires burned low. Wood was running out. The cold crept in from every corner, breath visible in clouds, fingers going numb despite the blankets. Someone coughed. The sound echoed in the silence. Then Anna began to hum, softly at first, almost inaudible under the wind's scream. A melody, simple, haunting, universal. Still Nacht, silent night. Her voice was small, fragile. A 19-year-old girl far from home, humming the carol her mother used to sing. The German women recognized it immediately, joined in. Quiet voices, blending. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, alles schläft, einsam wacht Isaiah. Heard it, knew the melody. His grandmother had sung it. His mother, every Christmas of his childhood. His bass voice added itself to the soprano, English words flowing as naturally as breath. Silent night, holy night, all is calm. All is bright. Corporal Armstrong joined, his tenor weaving between the bass and soprano, then Private Donnelly, then Sergeant Blake, English and German, the same melody, different words, same hope. Nur das traute, hochheilige Paar holder Knabe im lockigen Haar, round yon Virgin, mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild. Margaret Evans stood near the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Thomas had loved this carol, had sung it off-key every Christmas. His terrible voice had never mattered. Only the joy. She added her voice to the chorus, shaky, broken, but present. Schlaf in himmlischer Ruhe, schlaf in himmlischer Ruhe, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. The final notes hung in the air, sacred, transformative. The mess hall had become a cathedral. 200 people, enemy nations, different languages, united by 8 notes of melody, by the universal yearning for peace, by the shared understanding that beneath uniforms and flags and borders, everyone was just trying to survive until morning. The silence after the song was profound, not empty, full, pregnant with possibility. Helen stood. Every eye watched her. She moved through the crowded hall, stepping over outstretched legs, around blanket-wrapped bodies, walking with purpose toward the kitchen, toward Isaiah. She stopped before him. This man who had saved Anna's life, whose son was missing, who carried grief identical to her own. "Mr. Crow," she said. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying across the silent hall. Isaiah looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the cornbread incident, saw not a German prisoner, not someone who had mocked his history, saw a woman who had lost her sister, who understood the weight of the gold star, who knew what it meant to have a piece of yourself torn away by war. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Helen took a breath. "Would you teach me to make bread?" She didn't say cornbread, just bread. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Isaiah's eyes went wet. He understood. This wasn't about the recipe, wasn't about cooking technique. This was about understanding, about crossing the final distance, about learning the story behind the survival. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I will." The kitchen glowed with warmth, gas burners lit, casting golden light across stainless steel surfaces. Isaiah and Helen stood at the prep table. He gathered ingredients. She watched with the focused attention of a teacher learning to be a student. "First thing," Isaiah said, his voice soft, "is to understand what cornbread is." He poured cornmeal into a bowl, let it run through his fingers like sand. It's not trying to be wheat bread. It's something different, something that comes from making do with what you have, from survival. Helen touched the cornmeal, felt its gritty texture. Nothing like the fine flour she knew from German bakeries. Rough, honest, real. "My grandmother," Isaiah continued, was born enslaved, 1840. Alabama. They gave the slaves field corn, the cheap stuff. She had to grind it by hand, her hands. He measured buttermilk, cracked eggs, his movements automatic. Muscle memory from 10,000 batches. She used to say cornbread was survival made solid. Every crumb represented a day her family lived, a day they didn't starve, a day they made it through. Helen mixed the ingredients as he instructed, her hands in the batter, feeling the texture, the weight. "During the Depression," Isaiah said, "my family ate cornbread every day, sometimes twice a day. We couldn't afford anything else. This kept us alive." He poured the batter into cast iron pans, slid them into the oven. "It's honest food," he said, doesn't pretend to be fancy, doesn't apologize for what it is, just fills your belly, reminds you that surviving is its own kind of victory. Helen watched the pans disappear into the heat, watched the batter begin to transform. "My mother," she said quietly, "used to tell me, when someone gives you bread, Helen, even if it tastes of sawdust, you say thank you, because they shared what they had." Isaiah looked at her. "Your mother and my grandmother, same wisdom, different wars, different countries, same truth." "I'm sorry," Helen said, the words she'd been carrying for 2 months. For laughing, for not understanding, for being ignorant of what that bread represented. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't know," he said finally. "Couldn't have known. But you know now. That's what matters." The oven timer rang. Others had gathered at the kitchen doorway. Anna, Margaret, Sergeant Blake, Corporal Armstrong, Private Donnelly, more German women, more guards, drawn by warmth, by the smell of baking bread, by the sight of 2 people building a bridge from grief and understanding. "Come in," Isaiah said. "Everyone, there's work to do." They filled the kitchen, 12 people. Then 20, mixing batter, greasing pans, measuring ingredients. Isaiah moved among them, teaching, guiding, sharing his grandmother's recipe with Germans and Americans alike. Helen worked beside Anna. Corporal Armstrong helped one of the older German women crack eggs. Sergeant Blake stirred a massive bowl of batter. Margaret greased pan after pan. The kitchen became a communion. Hands working together, creating something from simple ingredients, creating hope from cornmeal and buttermilk. Batch after batch went into the ovens, emerged golden, fragrant, perfect. Isaiah cut the first batch into squares, passed them around the kitchen. Everyone took one, held it, the warmth seeping into cold hands. "My grandmother said," Isaiah announced to the crowded kitchen, "that cornbread doesn't end hunger, but it reminds you why surviving matters." He took a bite. Others followed. They ate in silence. Sacred, understanding. Anna closed her eyes. "Es schmeckt nach Frieden," she whispered. "It tastes like peace." Helen ate slowly, tasting not just cornmeal and buttermilk, tasting history, survival. Ruth Crow's hands grinding corn. The Great Depression, Isaiah's family making do. Every crumb a story, every bite a bridge. Isaiah looked at Helen across the crowded kitchen. "You didn't need to learn the recipe," he said gently. "You needed to understand the story." "I understand now," Helen said. "I understand." The blizzard raged through the night, but inside the mess hall, 200 people shared cornbread, shared blankets, shared warmth. The divisions had dissolved, not from policy, not from orders, from the simple act of making bread together, from understanding that survival was a language everyone spoke. Morning came slowly, grey light filtering through frosted windows. The wind had died, the snow had stopped. Iowa lay silent under a white blanket. The heating system was repaired by noon. People returned to their quarters. Life resumed its routines. But something fundamental had changed. The distance was gone. The bridge was built. The weeks that followed moved like slow ice melting. January brought bitter cold, but warmth had returned to the mess hall. Isaiah's cornbread appeared every Sunday. The German women ate it with quiet gratitude, understanding in every bite. Helen taught English with renewed purpose, but she also learned about Reconstruction, about sharecropping, about all the history that lived in simple food. February thawed slightly. Anna helped Isaiah in the kitchen sometimes, learning not just recipes, but stories. Ruth Crow's voice reaching across decades, across an ocean, teaching a German girl about survival. Margaret walked the camp each morning, her gold star lighter somehow. Grief shared was grief halved. She and Isaiah and Helen formed an unlikely trinity, three people who understood loss, who understood that healing didn't erase the wound, it just made living with it possible. The distance was gone, the bridge was solid now, and then, in March, hope arrived, March 15th, 1945. Isaiah was in the kitchen when Margaret found him. She was running, actually running, her face bright with something that looked like joy. "Isaiah!" she called. "Isaiah, there's a letter." He turned, saw the envelope in her hand, Red Cross markings, international routing stamps. His hands trembled as he took it. From Caleb, he tore it open, read words that blurred through sudden tears. Alive. Caleb was alive, rescued by British destroyer HMS Orion after his ship went down. Had been floating on debris for 18 hours. Pulled from the water more dead than alive. Recovered in a British hospital. Now prisoner of war in Japan, but alive. Alive. Isaiah collapsed against the prep table, the letter crumpling in his grip, great sobs shaking his shoulders. Margaret held him, this woman who had lost her son, holding this man whose son had been returned. Helen appeared in the doorway, saw Isaiah weeping, knew immediately these were tears of joy. She crossed the kitchen, put her arms around him. This man who had taught her about bread, about survival, about grace. "He's alive," Isaiah managed. "My boy, my Caleb. He's alive." Helen held him tighter. "Thank God. Thank God." The war wasn't over. Caleb was still a prisoner, still in danger. But he was alive. Hope had won. For today, at least, hope had won. The war ground on. But Caleb was alive. That knowledge sustained Isaiah through April's rains, through the news from Europe, through the slow advance toward victory. Helen wrote to Hamburg, letters that might never arrive, telling imaginary nieces and nephews about an American cook, about cornbread, about how survival crossed oceans. April brought rumors, Germany collapsing, the end near. Anna turned 20 in late April. The women celebrated with cornbread cake, Isaiah's invention. The guards joined, singing in 2 languages. The walls were gone now, only people remained. And then came May, and with it, the end, May 8th, 1945, VE Day. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered. The fighting had stopped. Camp Algona prepared to close. The German prisoners would be repatriated, sent home to rebuild their shattered country. May 30th, the final day. Helen found Isaiah in the kitchen one last time. She carried a bowl, flour dusted on her hands. "I made something," she said, "for you." She uncovered the bowl. Inside was dark bread, heavy, dense,